The result of the U.S. presidential race is of utmost interest to the international community, including Europe, where officials believe the U.S. is increasingly pivoting its priorities to the Indo-Pacific amid competition with China and tensions over North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions. We have more in this edition of Press Perspective. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Wednesday, November 6th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, we continue to touch upon the broader implications of the U.S. election on global security and more. For this, I have Kelly KASULIS Cho for American Daily, The Washington Post. Kelly, it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Sebastien Falletti for French daily, Figaro. Sebastien, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Right then, Kelly, let's begin with the latest on the U.S. election. What do we know thus far?
Well, right now the election hasn't officially been called, but projections suggest that Trump is really closing in on victory to become president and have a second term. Right now, the projections suggest that he has 267 out of 270 required electoral college votes. So things are, looking nearly definite. Some states are still counting votes, and these are, again, just projections, so it's not the total popular vote. The Republicans have basically won the Senate at this point. The House remains undecided, and this happened quite fast today. We were expecting some states to take days, potentially, before there was a clear outlook.
Right, and I believe Republican nominee Donald Trump has addressed his supporters, and he gave what appears to have been a victory speech. I'm assuming that the atmosphere at his camp has been quite euphoric, right?
Yes, we have reporters out there, and I mean, it looks like they're, celebrating a victory already, a little preemptively, but still, they've been clapping, cheering, singing songs. A lot of people are wearing his famed red hat. There's really a feeling of victory there. And I think a couple hours ago, really, for the people who are in Harris's camp, they observed, kind of a more grim atmosphere as, the projections started coming in.
Right. She had been hoping to address the supporters at Howard University, her alma mater, right?
Yeah, it's unclear why she hasn't, but those people have gone home, and yeah, we're waiting to see if there's going to be a speech coming from her soon.
Right then. Moving forward, Sebastien, I understand that this question is a little irrelevant now, but if Europe had been able to vote in the US election, which candidate would Europe have voted for and why, in your view?
Well, I mean, of course, today the results that are shaping up as probably this is a day of reckoning for Europe. I mean, if you listen to the capitals, to the government, I think, of course, a majority of this capital would have favored a Democrat president, because for diplomatic, geopolitical reason that the Democrats, Kamala해리스, after Joe Biden, have been saying that they want to strengthen allies, especially NATO, and this is, of course, something essential for most capitals in Europe, especially at the time where they are at war, the war in Ukraine at the border of Europe. So this is like a key point. And of course, the capitals were hoping that they are worried about the transatlantic relationship future. But of course, if you listen to other kind of people, like some grassroots voters, if you listen to some populist political leader like Mr. Viktor Orban, he has been clearly saying he prefers Donald Trump. And we're seeing across the EU also the kind of similar polarization that we are seeing in the US, with some radical parties on the left and on the right getting stronger, including in France. The latest election showed that polarization. And in most of the EU countries, you're seeing some political leaders who are seeing Mr. Trump as an example, or at least as a model they would like to copy in their own constituency. So I think to answer your question, yeah, if you look at the elite, they all favor continuity, Kamala Harris win, but if you're talking about the electorate, it's much more split.
Right. Sebastien, Mr. Trump has demanded that members of NATO raise their defense spending to 2% of their GDPs. That being said, where does France's spending stand as we speak?
Yeah, so France has been, is now in 2023 was at 1.9 and supposed to be at the 2% threshold of NATO. Overall, the big picture is that, France has always been one of the highest spender on defense in Europe in general because France is a recalcitrant member of NATO, has always been advocating a more independent defense strategy. But what we are seeing, the bigger picture is that most European members are suddenly raising up their spending in the wake of the Ukraine conflict. It's a major wake-up call, and we are seeing now levels that I think now we're talking about 18 countries who have been meeting this target out of 31, and we're hoping that next year it could be 23 countries. So European countries are waking up to this. But the bigger question here with Mr. Trump probably coming back is the question of Ukraine. What is the US going to do about Ukraine? Is he going to drop its support for Kiev like he has advocated during the campaign? And this is a major concern among European capitals, because if the US withdraw or limit its military support to Ukraine, the burden is going to fall on Europeans, and clearly European defenses are not ready for that. European budgets are not ready for that. So that would be a major call. So the bigger question here is also, we know that Mr. Trump also likes to bargain, and he has always showed this strategy, including with Korea, about raising the bar and then trying to extract some concession from allies. So that's what we're also going to watch carefully in the coming months, if he's truly back in the White House.
Right. Kelly, the Washington Post recently published a piece on Europe's preparation for a possible second Trump administration. Now, what did analysts in that piece say about the merits and setbacks of such a scenario in which Mr. Trump returns to the White House, which is looking to be a reality?
Yeah, my colleagues at the Post reported, citing a number of officials and insiders within European Union member states, that basically some countries are thinking about contingency plans if former President Trump becomes president-elect, particularly on issues of security and trade, as Sebastien mentioned. I think, when it comes to trade, Trump has suggested that he wants to increase tariffs, something that he's already done on things like steel in the past. Whether that's a merit or a setback really depends on your own interests and from where you sit on the global stage. Security, Ukraine is really a big question. It's not exactly clear where he stands on Ukraine and what that will mean for support, although there certainly has been some indicators in the past that former President Trump has sort of a friendly relationship with Putin and may have some critiques of how President Biden has dealt with this issue so far. I think in the past he mentioned that the war wouldn't have happened or would be over soon if he were president again. I don't know how exactly that would occur. In terms of NATO, former President Trump has suggested that he's not a fan of that alliance, which has been a big stake in, maintaining a sort of liberal world order, if you will. And so, there's a lot of question right now about transatlantic relations, and I think, it really just depends on whether you're looking at this from a pro-America approach on trade, the economy and tariffs. And even that, some economists would say that increasing tariffs isn't necessarily that advantageous to the US or the global economy. And when it comes to security, it looks like from a European standpoint, there would be a lot of concerns there.
Right, and staying with Europe, Sebastien, speaking to the Washington Post, in that article that I mentioned, German Defense Ministry spokesperson Michael Stempfel claimed that regardless of who wins the election, the US is likely to focus more on the Indo-Pacific than on Europe, and accordingly, Europe must prepare for its own security. What are your thoughts regarding this specific comment?
Yeah, this is a strategic shift, and the writing has been on the wall since, I would say, even Barack Obama. Barack Obama is the first to mention the so-called Asia pivot already a decade ago, and then this has been accelerated by Donald Trump in a more aggressive way when it comes to trade. But Joe Biden has been actually building upon this, strengthening alliance in the Indo-Pacific. And in that regard, meanwhile, we had the Ukraine conflict, which has been a kind of also a distraction from that trend. But clearly, we can see that the US always kept a clear focus on China. And now, yeah, if Trump is back, this is going to be a reality check for major EU countries, especially Germany, because it might openly say that now the US are really moving on to the Pacific and they want to let the Europeans deal with their own problem. This is a major issue for Germany because Germany is still behind in terms of military spending. They're at 1.5%, and also their military force doesn't have any combat experience in recent years. So there's a lot of question mark about. It's one thing to say this in an interview. It's another thing to deliver reform, to build up, to strengthen your military capability. And this is also a discussion at the EU-wide level. There's a big debate now about whether the EU should develop a kind of defense budget, get some financial resources to fund a EU defense industry. And these are, of course, sensitive discussion among member states because some member states are opposed to the idea of providing more financial support to Brussels. So a lot of question mark that's going to be at the forefront of EU debate in the coming months.
Right. Too many questions and too few answers, as one pundit I spoke to was saying. Kelly, there is also much concern about the fate of climate action under a new US leadership. That would be a Trump leadership. What can you tell us about his likely policies, that is, with regard to climate change, based on his initiatives when he was the president before?
Yeah, this is really one of the big issues where you see a very big difference between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. Former President Trump has essentially suggested that he does not believe that human behavior or human actions is the primary driving force of climate change. That's an opinion that does not stand with a lot of world leaders, or certainly the United Nations, major international organizations. I want to get this quote correctly, but in 2016, former President Trump told the Washington Post editorial board that he is, quote, not a great believer in man-made climate change. So I think that speaks a lot to what we might be able to expect on this issue in the future. If you look at his record as president, he pulled out of the Paris Accord and was the only country, or the first country, to initiate doing that. That process took about 3 years to actually accomplish, but really we're seeing a very big difference from what Vice President Harris has said. Vice President Harris has called climate change an existential threat. On the campaign trail, she unveiled a $10 trillion plan to invest in renewable energy and to hold the greatest polluters accountable in the United States. And as Attorney General of California, she's also known for prosecuting some companies that have had a big impact on the environment. And so if we're looking at former President Trump as the projected winner as president-elect this year, we're looking at potentially some big changes in terms of climate policy. With that said, I'm not sure if climate policy is really the forefront issue that American voters are even thinking about at this moment, so it may not be the first thing on his agenda to address.
Right. Sebastien, as Kelly just mentioned, Mr. Trump did pull out of the Paris Agreement when he was president. Do tell us a bit about the Paris Accord.
Well, I mean, this was a landmark agreement back in 2015 that was crafted in Paris, and it was a frantic effort with the US, China, and the EU and the emerging country being the key player in this negotiation. And of course, it was hailed as a breakthrough with the idea of keeping the rise of temperature globally at 1.5 degrees. But since then, there has been some setback. And of course, one of the main setbacks when Donald Trump was elected in 2017, he decided to withdraw from that agreement. And of course, the US being a major polluter, that was a major challenge to this agreement. Joe Biden, when he was elected, bring back the US in 2021. So as Kelly mentioned, the big question now is Donald Trump too, if he's elected, going to withdraw again? There are some question marks here also, because this is also a big business question. And meanwhile, because of this agreement, the big business, including oil and gas companies, have started to transit to some also renewable energies. They are investing massively. So when you listen to some of those companies, they also have some, they have invested and some are pivoting. And what is at stake is also who's going to be the leader of the so-called clean energy in the future. And if the US withdraw, it might put also US industries behind that field, and this is a field where, for example, China is investing massively and becoming the leader when it comes to solar panel or to green energy, electric vehicle. So it would be also interesting to see on that issue where big business is involved, what's going to be the decision of the future White House.
Right. Kelly, the final campaign messages by the two presidential nominees saw Harris vowing unity, while Trump continued to lash out at his opposition using crude language in some occasions. That being said, how does Mr. Trump's camp seek to bring together a nation that has been deeply polarized by this latest election?
That's a really good question. I'm not even sure necessarily where the two sides stand on their desire to lessen political polarization in the U.S. You know, if you look at the campaign messaging of both candidates, they're very different, right? Former President Trump's final campaign ads really focused on his own voter base, focused on you know, accusations of inflation being an issue, even though we know that inflation has cooled, and that being the responsibility of Vice President Harris and President Biden, focusing on things like the economy, whereas Vice President Harris really focused on messages of unity. I think one of the zingers that she was putting out in the last few days was, you know, she has a to-do list, whereas former President Trump has an enemies list. And so I think if you just look at the messaging there, the targeting is very, very different strategically. In terms of unifying the country, I really don't know what the plan is among Trump's camp. I think right now, you know, the left is very focused on this election because of issues of abortion, women's rights, and the right is really focused on a completely different side of that political spectrum. And there's just such a different stance in terms of the political identities of the left and right that it's quite frankly difficult to imagine a point where we are not politically polarized immediately after this election.
Right. Sebastien, then, speaking as a foreign journalist looking into the situation in the U.S. from the outside, of course, what do you suggest with regards to efforts to bring American people together after this election?
Well, but as Kelly said, I don't know if the next president wants to unite the people. I mean, there's the question whether, because Trump, as mentioned, has been very talented at polarizing the country. He saw polarization as a way to build, as a path to victory. And this is where he's changing the game and why all political leaders around the world are looking at this. Because as I said before, in Europe, also in emerging countries, you can see the same tactics being applied quite successfully by some, where you basically, instead of uniting, you divide, you create enemies, and that allows you to build up a base that can lead you to power. So it's a new strategy, and if Trump is re-elected, it will be a major significance globally, because it means that 2016 is not just an accident. It shows that this tide, you know, of anti-elite movement that we are seeing both in developed economies but also in emerging economies, where you have basically grassroots voters who are not trusting their elite, not trusting people in charge, is becoming a global phenomenon. Of course, here you have many other factors at play. You have social media, you have the way people get information, There are many factors here that we don't have time to discuss here. But yeah, the question you're asking is there still a plan to unite people onto one? Of course, the next president will have to do that in one way or another. But is this really the priority? Again, we will see this in the coming days and weeks.
All right. Well, next year, once the new administration comes into power, I suppose. All right, Sebastien, on that very sobering note, I'm afraid we'll have to end today. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Kelly, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for Press Perspective today. We return same time tomorrow with more on the U.S. presidential race and its implications.